Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show, MSL Insights. Today, we're going to be discussing the importance of an integrated KOL engagement strategy. My name is Samuel Dyer, and I'm the chairman of the board for the Medical Science Liaison Society. And for those on the line that don't know, the MSL Society is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and in fact, the only organization dedicated to advancing the global MSL profession by helping MSLs and managers become more effective in their careers. We accomplish this by offering numerous unique resources, including the first and only board certification for MSLs and MSL leaders. In simple terms, like any other certification, it allows experienced MSLs and managers to validate their skills and knowledge of the MSL profession based on criteria determined by a large number of independent MSL and medical affairs leaders from some of the top pharmaceutical companies. Anyone interested in learning more about the Medical Science Liaison Board certification can see the link there on the screen, and I would encourage you to go to that website to learn more. Also, as a reminder, nominations for the 2020 MSL of the Year Awards are still open. There are 8 categories this year, including MSL Rookie of the Year, MSL of the Year, MSL Manager Rookie of the Year, and MSL Manager of the Year, with each having a U.S. and outside of U.S. awards. This year, we also have 12 highly experienced MSL leaders that will be judging submissions. The awards are completely free to enter and to win, and you do not need to be an MSL Society member to participate or win. You can see there the nomination deadline is September 9th, so coming up soon. We'll send a link to everyone to learn more, but the link on the page there will provide you more information as well. So before we get started, I just want to go over a few quick technical details. As participants, you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. However, in your control panel, you'll notice that you have a question panel. We encourage you to type your comments or questions into the question panel throughout the discussion, and we'll try to address as many relevant questions as possible. We've also been asked by several people if we will be recording this. Yes, we are recording this show, and it will be available on the MSL Society website for everyone very soon. We just need a few days to put it together. I also would like to thank H1 for sponsoring and partnering with us today for today's show. You can see their URL there. They do some great stuff for MSLs, and so I would encourage you to go to their website and check them out. So that brings us to today's show. We're going to discuss the importance of an integrated KOL engagement strategy. For today's show, we've had over almost 400 MSLs, MSL managers, directors, VPs, and various other roles from over 44 countries register for this today. So it's clearly an important topic. And having an integrated KOL engagement strategy can have a direct impact on the success of MSLs and make it much easier to add value to the KOLs they support. So joining me today to discuss this important topic is Randy Geckler, who is the former Executive Director of Stakeholder Relationships at Allergan, and Mark Taylor, who is the Executive Client Director at H1. So Randy, Mark, thank you very much for joining me here today.
Thanks so much, Sam.
So I want to start our show today with the results of one question from the survey that we're conducting right now. And we asked, this is preliminary data from a couple of hundred MSLs, 219 to be exact, but about 200 MSLs and managers. We asked this question: does your company utilize an integrated stakeholder plan? Now, interestingly, it was the results, preliminary results are kind of a mix, but interestingly, 29% said no, and another 36% said I don't know, which if you add those up, that's 65% either no or I don't know, with the remaining 36% saying yes. Randy, I'm going to start with you. Do these results surprise you, and what is your reaction to this?
Sure. No, they didn't. I was actually I was pleased that 36% have a plan. So I'm really excited to get some of the questions today because I'm really interested to see how these integrated plans are being utilized within the industry and across different therapeutic categories. The don't know and unsure part was not surprising to me because I think that it's either still work that's in silos, which makes it not integrated, or it's something that's not familiar with the MSLs, which hopefully today we can work to address.
Excellent. Mark, any thoughts or comments on the results of this survey question?
Well, I agree with Randy that in terms of the numbers of people who don't really know if there is a strategic and integrated plan at their organization. I say that because I work with a lot of large organizations, both pharmaceutical and biotech, and because they're so siloed in many cases, they may not know what the right hand's doing from the left hand, and they're only kind of focused on their, so to speak, marching orders. So and in many cases, some of the MSLs may not understand what that engagement strategy is and why it's important to them. So I'm not shocked to hear that there's so many people who either don't know if their organization has one or aren't quite sure what one is. And hopefully today, with the comments that come from myself and Randy, they'll walk away with a little bit more information about the definition of a integrated KOL engagement strategy.
Excellent. Yeah, and I know we're going to get into a lot of questions that we want to talk about, and certainly we encourage everybody listening to submit your own as well. Um, Randy actually has put together a infographic, and we're going to put that in the link that it gives a little more clear visual representation of an integrated stakeholder plan. So look for that in the chat. You guys, anybody listening, can open that up as well. Which leads me to this first sort of question that I have, and I want to have both of you address. And Randy, I'm going to start with you again. Um, let's start at the top, and that is, why is an integrated KOL engagement strategy even important?
Sure. So for those of you who are going to take opportunity to look at the infographic, I'm going to use it to describe a bit of my responses. So if you have it and you can open it, great. If not, I will do my best to describe my answers as well. So part of the problem and why it's so important is that our goal is always to create those mutually beneficial partnerships and to ensure internal transparency. Without an integrated plan, it's really hard to do either of those things. And because, as we talked a few moments ago on the opportunity in the introductory comments about the don't knows and knows that we're unsure, I think it's important to understand that different individuals within the organization are working with key opinion leaders or key external experts, if you will. And what's really important is that we have that transparency and continuity so that the expert has that best possible experience and really can work seamlessly within the organization. Oftentimes, I get asked the question, can you have somebody that has experience and or expertise in early drug development and all the way through? And we always say that that's nirvana, but what's important is to understand who's working with whom within the organization to really solidify that relationship and build that relationship with the expert and the organization, and in particular with this particular conversation, the MSL and the relationship between the MSL and the physician.
Excellent, excellent. Mark, any thoughts on this? Obviously, I think that the value of having you here today is, is to share what you're seeing at other companies. From your perspective and the companies you've worked with, and you guys are working with at H1, why is this integrated KOL strategy or engagement strategy important? Why is this relevant?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Well, first of all, I just want to say I love the infographic that Randy shared with us. It's really colorful. It's fantastic. I think it tells a great story. If I take a step back, I might want to say, you know, give a little bit more definition as to what an engagement plan is. And I see a KOL engagement plan essentially as a plan that an MSL or medical affairs team uses to really help them determine which KOL an MSL is going to see, when they're planning to see that KOL, and what they're planning to talk to that KOL about. And I've seen the most important and the most successful organizations try to develop those plans. And that's why they're so important. I've seen MSL teams develop a list of KOLs by territory and then rank them by territory. And that gives them the opportunity to determine how important that KOL is to that MSL in their territory by two things: the amount of influence a KOL has, and then B, the level of interest that MSL has in their scientific drug, mechanism of action, or product. And then they use that information to kind of develop that lower level territory plan. So I think once an MSL knows and deems the importance of a KOL in their territory, they understand how frequently they're going to see that territory. And I think that starts to develop the reason as to why that engagement strategy is so important, both at the territory level, at the regional level, and at the global/corporate level. And so what I've seen in the marketplace is that the importance and the value of a strategic KOL engagement plan, it's essential. It's essential for pharmaceutical companies so that they can ensure that a plan is in place for developing an effective and efficient and a sustainable relationship with KOLs, not only across the globe, but at a regional level and at a local level. And to this point, many of the clients that I work with are really starting to recognize that in this day and age, knowledge truly is power, and data is the fuel that powers the engine for a medical affairs team, a commercial team, or a data insights team. And from what I've seen, any one of these key groups that would be involved in a holistic integrated KOL plan understand that the use of data gives them a great advantage. And I think the best companies really strive to leverage data from a single source and use that data across the organization to understand what KOLs are important to them and what they're doing, what KOLs are publishing, what KOLs are speaking about, where they're speaking, the type of trials they're involved in, and the sphere of influence. And I think all of those combined are essential ingredients toward building a great recipe for success. So I think that's why I've seen that with the companies that I work with, that having a KOL engagement strategy is really important to them holistically.
Yeah, I think these are excellent points that both of you brought up, and certainly for the MSL teams that we work with, the MSL Society, the really successful ones have a comprehensive, certainly KOL engagement plan, but also activities for their KOLs that they're working with. And so I think this is a really sound advice and points that both of you have brought up. We got a comment in the chat. I can't see the graphic. The infographic is in the chat box, so look for the link. Jeff on our team has sent that out, so you guys should have access there, and I can see it there. So go into the chat. The link is there. Leads me to the second point that I want to have both of you address is, and Randy, I'm going to go back to you as well first on this, and it's really around the challenges of this. And so can you share some of the challenges that would precipitate the need for an integrated KOL engagement plan, and then maybe address what is the value to the MSL KOL relationship?
Sure. So if you take, thanks for the question. If you take a look at the infographic, and if those of you who can see it, sort of the issues and the challenges are on that left-hand column, or that left-hand component of the infographic. And I have a little crisis cloud above it. And so the challenges, and this is why this is so important, particularly now as we're in the middle of this whole COVID and virtual engagement approach. But I'm going to go with sort of some of the key challenges first, and then I want to talk a little bit about how this makes even more sense in the crisis. So the challenges are often, and you can see it in the infographic, that you can have overused stakeholders. It's not, if the work isn't done properly and there's not a proper vetting of the stakeholders, particularly if it's an experienced team, internal in medical affairs or external, particularly internally in medical affairs. I've noticed that they go back to the same 5 folks over and over again. I can recall actually even asking somebody when I started a role many years ago, where was their list, and it was pinned on their bulletin board, and here's my 5 guys. I'm like, okay. So it's really important that you go through that whole vetting process, and whether you use a bibliometric analyses or whatever methodology you use for identification, internal, external, third party, et cetera, having the right KOLs and the right number for your disease state is critically important. So I think overused physicians and stakeholders is often a problem. The second is that there's often an inefficient or ineffective way that our internal stakeholders work together. Sometimes the internal folks don't know what the external folks are doing, and even in larger organizations, internally, sometimes we don't even know in medical affairs that there are our global counterparts have joined us at a particular conference because we don't have the opportunity to create that internal transparency. So again, the integrated plan will provide for that level of insight. And I talked about this a moment ago, but the inconsistency in expert integration across the life cycle, that it's great when we can have that physician that can go all the way through the life cycle. And what makes it more difficult and creates for greater challenges is when we use physicians in one particular opportunity, and then we sort of put them on the shelf and then take them off the shelf and put them back on the shelf. That really does not build for those mutually beneficial partnerships. And all of that sort of leads to potentially a lot of missed opportunities. And then if you layer on where we currently are with COVID, and that's sort of in my little crisis cloud, it really makes it even harder, because if we have a plan, we would know what we needed to do in the absence of the crisis, but the crisis will give us the impetus to go back to the plan, look at it, and reevaluate what we've done, what our strategies are, what our objectives are, and ask ourselves the question, what do we need to do differently? What do we need to continue? What do we need to accelerate? What do we need to innovate on? And we can't make those basic decisions for a crisis or in the middle of a crisis, and of course then everything's moving very quickly, unless that plan is already in place. So those are really the reasons that I organized that component of the infographic. I'll pause there, and maybe there are some questions, or Mark has some other comments.
Yeah, Mark, can you jump in here and talk about that from your perspective?
Sure, happy to. I agree with Randy on some of the key points that there certainly is a need to have an integrated plan. You know, considering the increasing complexity of the pharmaceutical environment today and the goals of pharmaceutical organizations, I really see that it's essential to plan and organize the interactions that you have with KOLs. Otherwise, there's a number of challenges that I've seen can certainly happen. I think the first thing that can happen is that there's a lack of coordinated approach between the company departments and how and what they might communicate to a KOL. And then therefore, there's a risk that there's a less than optimal plan of efficiency for each contact with a KOL. And I think that goes in line and in sync with some of the things that Randy was just saying. And because of that, a busy KOL might lose their patience or respect for the MSL, the company, or the potential product should the marketplace be crowded with other competitors. And that's clearly a challenge, because corporate reputation and I think product recognition is also essential to expect a clear commitment from KOLs, similar to what Randy said. I think the other prominent risk or challenge is the impact of inaccurate or untimely data, and that can lead to a severe loss of productivity. You know, just as an example, if a medical affairs team, commercial team, or marketing team don't have a strong technology that they're using, and maybe they're using desktop research to identify influential KOLs in their specific therapeutic area, and desktop research might be another, euphemism for Googling, then they're spending endless hours trying to use Google or LinkedIn or other sources to understand maybe which KOLs are writing guidelines in a particular country, whether it's Canada or the UK, which KOL is writing them, or maybe they're trying to understand which KOL is working in a cardiology disease state and speaking or chairing a conference in Germany or some other country, and who's been invited to speak or chair some of these conferences. And if you have 10 leaders in medical affairs or these other departments doing the same type of work, then you could have up to 40 or 50 people wasting time and precious resource hours in doing the same thing and not using the good, reliable data. And that could be a challenging situation. And the impact of that and it could be detrimental. And I think the value to the MSL KOL relationship is one where you're trying to develop trust, you're trying to develop respect and effectiveness. And I think if it's done correctly, then it allows that relationship to grow and flourish in a positive direction. And I think if there's no plan, as Randy makes mention of, then that relationship can be damaged at various levels of the business. And the impact of that damage can be extremely detrimental to all those different teams, because that KOL, if there's only 5 that Randy points to, they can be, extremely overworked. And that just leads to a detriment in the relationship. So those are my thoughts, and I think that's why the value of a great plan can be used throughout the business.
Yeah, no, I think these are great points, and the challenge is for certainly MSLs, boots on the ground, who are actually going out and engaging with KOLs. If you're not doing this, what are you doing, and how are you measuring your success with your KOLs? And part of what we know from multiple surveys with KOLs is they generally want one point of contact, and they want that to be consistent, the communication. And so I think that you guys have pointed out, some of the challenges and advantages to this. Randy, I'm going to come back to you on this just very quickly. We have a lot we want to get to, but what's one practical piece of advice as it relates to this, in terms of what MSLs can do? Because I say MSLs because obviously as a society we're focused on MSLs, but
Yeah.
we have hundreds of MSLs and managers that have registered for this. What's one just very granular, practical piece of advice on what MSLs can do as it relates to this?
Sure. So I think if there's one thing I would say, do you know the medical strategy for your brand? And if you know it, or you're not sure if you know it, getting to know it and who is driving that plan for that year is critically important, because that would be the real opportunity to start to integrate your thoughts and the experiences that you have as the boots on the ground, as the folks that are meeting with all of those physicians, to start to integrate them into the plan, because headquarters may have missed them. So knowing what the strategy is, knowing who's driving the strategy internally, are probably a really, really good place to start.
Yep, excellent. Mark, any pieces of advice from a granular level, just practical advice for MSLs?
No, I think I wholeheartedly agree with Randy. I think that understanding who's driving that strategic plan and working with them is truly important. I think whoever's setting that strategy can work across the enterprise, whether it's on a regional basis or global enterprise, and kind of set the direction for the organization and the manner in which the strategy and the messaging is communicated. And I think that makes for an effective communication plan that's felt across various KOLs, across the disease state, and across the product line. So I agree with what Randy states.
Yeah, I think it's excellent, right? I mean, if you don't know the medical strategy, how are you actually going out and building effective long-term relationship with KOLs? My piece of advice, my practical piece of advice as it relates to this is, even if your company does not require it, or your manager is not asking you for it, and I'm speaking to all the MSLs tuned in right now, I would strongly suggest that you create an individual KOL engagement plan for every KOL that you are supporting. It's the only way you're going to know over a year period, half year, whatever that is. You need to create an individual plan for everybody that you're supporting. So that would be mine. Randy, moving on, we got lots of comments and questions. It's fantastic. Here's a comment from the audience. And by the way, everybody who's tuning in, once again, for those who have not tuned in previous shows, I'm going to read your question or comment out loud. I'll use your first name only. That way you know that it is your question, so Randy and Mark knows where it's coming from as well. This is just a comment, and I'll just just ask you to quickly agree, disagree if you have anything else to this, but I think it's important. Barbara has said the benefit of the external stakeholder is essential to bring the external expert into a situation with the internal stakeholder and have an understanding of the EE value. So EE meaning KOL. Do you agree with that, Randy?
Wholeheartedly. I love Barbara wherever she is in the world. Thank you. Makes a lot of sense.
We love Barbara. Thanks, Barbara. Mark, any comments or thoughts on that?
No, I think that makes perfect sense. I think you have to have that engagement externally and internally, and have that holistic message, working effectively for everybody. So I agree.
Excellent. I got another. I'm going to take one more question right now. Michael has said a medical strategy can be created by medical affairs, but what is the best way to implement that strategy into the entire organization? That's very broad. There's a lot that obviously goes into that, but any quick sort of thoughts on that, Randy?
I would say find either, depending on the life cycle of the compound, I would try, and if you look at my picture, I would try and find either somebody on the R&D side or somebody on the commercial side, depending upon where it is in the life cycle, and start to partner with them. Because that sort of groundswell of collaboration will get the ball rolling in terms of integrating and understanding what the other parts of the organization are doing. So I'd find a partner.
Mark?
I think integration I know at the clinical side of the house is really important. I know I am agreeing a lot with Randy, but she's an expert, so I have everything that she's mentioning makes absolute sense to me.
I'm just old. I'm not.
No, you're very experienced, Randy. I think the integration, collaboration, starting from the clinical side, I think that the medical effectiveness team, medical communication team, I think that emanates from clinical as well. So I think that's where that integration and that medical strategy can start. And as long as that message is a unified message, and that there's agreement from the commercial side, the clinical side, and the medical team, then I think that allows for a comprehensive way to put together a strong strategy that doesn't have any gaps. And as long as you don't have gaps, I think that leads to the best way to find the most success.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think these are great comments. And by the way, Mark, I think there's nothing wrong with agreeing with Randy, because it's going to get real weird and awkward if everything you disagreed with. It's better than the alternative.
Samuel, there's one more thing that I just wanted to add. I mentioned it when
Please.
I said go find somebody, but it's really something that I think is really important in this work and in a lot of sort of strategy work, is to identify a thought partner, whether it's a thought partner on the inside of the organization in medical affairs or R&D or commercial, or a thought partner within your field, out in the field itself, within in your medical affairs team, or your field medical team. I think it's really important, because particularly when you're working in alone, right, in the field, finding another partner and somebody to bounce ideas off of and to strategize with really makes both the plans, your plan and your colleagues' plan, better. So I really suggest everybody try and find that thought partner. To me, I think that's an important piece of developing a strategy. It's very difficult to do it in isolation.
Yeah, excellent. And I think that this is what certainly makes this that much more successful, is you have to have multiple people provide input and for this to be effective. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Absolutely. It's not integrated otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, it defeats the title, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, go ahead. Somebody, was that Brian or Mark? Did you have a question?
No, I didn't have a question, but
no.
I'll just echo again what Randy said. But whether you're an MSL or you take that perspective of being out in the field, whether you're a salesperson, like me, and you develop plans, you're right. She calls it a thought leader. I call it a peer review, where if I'm developing a plan for my territory, I want to bounce it off someone. I want to bounce it off. I might not want to bounce it off my manager, but one of my peers that can give me honest feedback as to whether it's a sound approach, if it makes sense, if they have some tried and true ideas that they've done in the past that I might want to incorporate. I think for an MSL out there in the field, you might feel like you're working within a vacuum and that, you know, you're trying to put this thing together and make it effective. And sometimes you might not know until 6 months later or 12 months later if it was effective. So yeah, finding someone to bounce these ideas off with your own integrated plan at the territory level is a sound piece of advice.
Yep, excellent. We got a couple of comments asking if there's other slides being shown that they can only see the host and panelist slide. Yes, you are seeing the correct slide. The MSL Insight show is meant to be kind of a live talk show where we take questions from the audience as well. So what you're seeing is correct. This is not a typical webinar where we're going to go after slide for slide. And so I just want to make sure everybody understood the format. We have a question here. I'm going to take another question from Brian. Brian has asked a very good question here, and you think about you know, from we're going to get kind of various levels and types of organizations on these calls. So again, Randy, I'm going to jump over to you first with this. So within an organization, which functional group typically owns the integrated stakeholder plan? Part of a small but growing organization, and there may be an opportunity to create this in the future.
So is it Ryan or Brian? I didn't hear that part.
Brian with a B.
B. So Brian, excellent question. My answer is really basic. Whoever has the most passion for it. In some of the organizations that I've worked in, and if you check out my LinkedIn profile, you'll see that I've worked in pretty large organizations for the majority of my career. I've been part of a team and or led a team that had the authorship of the integrated plan. Having said that, that's not always the case, and not, as we saw it early on in the data, 60% plus don't have one or are unsure that one exists. So that's why I answered the question as I did. Whoever has passion for it. And when I thought about what I wanted to talk about today, one of the things that was really important to me when I thought about sort of the key messages was to be able to empower the MSLs to really take action. And if you're passionate about this, then raise your hand and say, this is something that I can do for the organization, and here's why. The reason why that I put the infographic together was because it's a hard project and a hard concept to explain. And so I encourage anybody that wants to use this, print it out, use it, make it your own story. But if it helps you to drive the opportunity and explain why this is important, by all means, take a copy of it and circulate it to the people to tell your story. But find the person that has the most passion in the organization, and if it's you, as I said, raise your hand.
Excellent. Mark, any comments or thoughts on that?
No, I think this question lends itself to Randy's experience and knowledge in leading teams, so I don't have anything that I could add to it at all.
Excellent, though. Very good. So here's another certainly topic that, you know, we kind of want to talk about is, you know, the elements. Randy, can you address what are some of the key elements of this strategic framework that we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes or so?
Sure. Again, I'm going to go back to my infographic. So you can see as they go down the road, or our characters go down the road, there's sort of 4 arrows that are pointing to the strategic framework. And we talked a little bit about them. It's sort of cross-functional alignment as part of the framework, relationship management, strategic engagement efficiencies, and then innovation. And so that's sort of what are the pillars to shape the plan. If you don't have the insights in order to garner all of those pieces, I'm going to tell you some sort of very basic elements, and they're really no different than any other communications plan. You need to have a landscape analysis. You need to understand the competitive environment, any market dynamics that are taking place. You need to identify, and this is important, the type of KOL that you have. And my team in the past has used a had used for many years a 3-letter acronym called SET. And I'll tell you what the acronym stands for. And then one of my colleagues convinced me that there needed to be an R. So the R stands, so the acronym is REST, R-E-S-T. And REST stands for researcher, educator, strategist, and trialist. And it's really important that when you look at your physician as the stakeholder, and we're only talking about physicians today, but if there's folks that are on the phone that have work in the payer space and they're do more payer MSL related activities, then the work in this acronym still applies in many cases. So it's important when you look at the physician to identify what attributes they have. Are they stronger as a researcher, stronger as an educator, stronger as a strategist, or stronger as a trialist? And one thing that is always really important, and this is where the MSLs have an enormous amount of opportunity and power, is you know your physicians really, really well. And what's important is to ask them what they want. You know, perhaps they have really been in the sort of the strategist space, and they are really great at advisory boards and or sort of panel consultants. However, maybe you could see them doing more education and doing more public speaking. And so asking them that question. One of the other sort of very interesting, and we don't have time for it today, but another sort of component to the educator that we've been looking at on my team has been the role of the digital opinion leader. And that becomes even more important as we continue to accelerate our work in the virtual and digital space. And so I would put the digital opinion leader under educator. So I think it's those 4 elements, and asking yourself and the physician, what are the things that are of most interest? Because there's no sense identifying a physician as a strategist to attend a series of advisory boards when the physician really doesn't want to do that. What they really are interested in doing is authoring a paper. And so then that's important to go back to the pubs team and talk to them about physicians that are interested in doing that type of work. And so I think that you really need to put the plan together in its full extent. You really need to understand what the role of those physicians are. And I would then sort of just caution to also be looking, when you're thinking about the types of physicians, that you also keep an eye out for the emerging physicians. And I know that I've worked, and my team has worked with H1 in the past, and there's some really good ways that you can identify up and coming and rising stars. I think that once you sort of pulled all that together, you have to kind of figure out what you're going to do with them and when you're going to do it, and then how you're going to measure it. And so always, and like with any plan, the upfront part is the hardest part, because everybody wants to do the cool ideas and they come in this sort of the tactical execution. But you really need to set that strategy up front with who's the right person to match against those activities, and then move into how you're going to engage them and measure. So very quickly, that's the long answer.
Excellent. Mark, any comments or thoughts about some of those elements that that Randy had mentioned? Maybe some things you guys have seen it with other companies as well?
Right. So Randy took the macro view and the strategic view of answering that, and that I think that plays into her experience and knowledge of working with these teams. I'm going to take the micro and tactical level in answering this question. So I've seen some of the most successful teams do a couple of things in terms of tactical things that they've done. Number one, they've used data to understand more about the scholarly background of a KOL. And I think that might lend itself to Randy's acronym of REST. They might be able to figure out who's more of an educator, who's more of a trialist, but then go back and ask them those questions based on the details that they have. The second thing that they do is they do mapping from both a geographical perspective as it relates to where the most HCPs are that treat their key disease condition, and they have an understanding from a regional and local level as to where those people are and how to map their territories to it. The third thing they do that the most successful organizations do is that they tier and segment those KOLs, either on scholarly things, or they might take a academic approach, or they might take a behavioral approach to tiering and segmenting those KOLs. And then from there, I think the fourth thing that they do plays right into what Randy said. The most successful organizations develop some type of determination as to which types of leaders are most important to them. Is the company or the various team more focused on publishing leaders, conference leaders, society leaders, or just as Randy just talked about, something new that I'm seeing more of, those digital opinion leaders. So I think those are all the things that kind of go into that tactical approach. And then once those KOLs have been selected, then I think the interactions with the pharmaceutical company or the teams and the activities that they do are more defined and more formal based on that knowledge that they have. So that's the tactical approach that I've seen in the elements that the most successful teams and organizations put in place.
Excellent. Excellent. So just another question from the audience is, and Randy, I'll jump back over to you as well, just so we can give Mark a break in between talking as well. Krista has asked, what advice do you have for medical affairs when you work closely with commercial teams in the field?
So commercial teams in the field, so you're talking about reps, or is there another role? Can I have a little bit more clarity on that? Is it like,
It didn't give it, Krista. If you want to put more into it, I'm guessing she's talking about sales reps here. So
yeah,
what
that's
advice
what
do you
I
have for
thought.
medical affairs? Yeah.
Again, I would go back and tether it to two things. So one, figure out what it is that you're trying to achieve. And if it's really just to start the collaboration, then I would find the commercial folks internally, since if it's a medical affairs person internally, I would find that internal counterpart. If it's an MSL to, is it a field MSL to sort of a field sales, I would still go back to the leadership of the MSL team, and then connect to the leadership of the commercial team and try and create the partnership and understand how you can work in concert with one another in a compliant way. And that's always the tricky part, right? And that's the question that often gets asked is this is a great idea, but how do you do this compliantly? And I will tell you that it can be done. You just have to be very inclusive in bringing your compliance partners into this process very early. So for the person who asked the question in the beginning about how do we get started, it's really important that as one of your thought partners, you include compliance pretty early on in your discussion. So I would try to ladder that back and connect to the commercial team and see if they can help you, because you've got to ensure that you have shared objectives. And if the objectives are very different, then you need to sort of have that conversation before you proceed.
Excellent. Mark, any thoughts on coordinating activities and working medical and commercial?
No, the levels that I get to, I don't have that inside track, that internal track of collaboration from the perspective that Randy does. So I can't really add to it effectively.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I think at that granular level, when you're talking about MSLs, I mean, I think Randy, that's some great advice. And just to add and build on that, the successful MSL teams are finding ways to add value to multiple stakeholders, and that includes internal, and that's your cross-functional team members, and that includes, of course, sales and marketing. No one's expecting an MSL to be a sales rep, but there are things that are important, and building and maintaining that value add to those, for those folks as well. So I think that is an important part that has to be a part of this. And so I think it's an excellent question.
And so I would take it one step
Please.
further and say to that point, if you do identify a cross-functional team, see if you can get a seat at the table. The insights that the MSL brings to the diversity of thought and the opportunity to brainstorm about what needs to be done, because they are so closely aligned to the physicians, is critical. So get a seat at that table, or create the table yourself and begin to build a cross-functional opportunity. It's really important that the MSL voice be brought into the internal part of the organization. It's critical.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Our next sort of talking point, I was thinking about, so we've talked a lot about the strategy, and the engagement plan and the valued MSLs and some of the elements. But what are some of the potential outcomes of an integrated plan? Randy, can you touch on that first?
Sure. So I'm going to, again, continue to reference my cartoon. And I think that there's sort of two pieces. The long-term piece is that you've established a strategic vision, right? And for those of you who have the opportunity to look at the infographic, it's the little plane flying over with the banner. And the impact is in sort of the puffy cloud, which talks about the mutually beneficial partnership. That's nirvana, right? When you have a mutually beneficial partnership, a long-term plan, you can measure it. You know what you know that you're aligned with all of your cross-functional team members and your go. That alone is an enormous win, and that does not often happen quickly. When you actually begin to implement the plan, whether it's on an individual basis in my mind or in a larger organization in a more comprehensive integrated plan, again, going back to sort of my infographic, is the opportunities to achieve launch excellence, better meetings, more impactful meetings, clear customer engagement, more efficient communications, and a coordinated collaboration, to name just a few. The one that I really want to talk about is the impactful meetings, because I think that's really important. When we think about when we were once able to go to conferences and we went to a scientific conference, whether it's ASCO, AHA, et cetera, what was really a big part of what we all do is bringing our physicians in for insight generation, conversations, scientific exchange, and oftentimes bringing in the roles that I've served in are headquarters-based executives to meet with the most important physicians. And what's really important is, if you've got this whole plan working, is the conversations can be extremely impactful and extremely important. You've got 45 minutes at the most of the executive's time. You've got 45 minutes alone with that physician. And you've got, if you've done your plan right, you've got the right people in the room. And that conversation can take both you and the expert to great achievements in a very short period of time. I've seen an enormous amount of work get done very quickly, and really sort of propels or perpetuates or fosters that relationship between you and the expert, and then ultimately the executive that has joined the meeting and provided that insight really sort of superpowers the dialogue and brings the richness back that you've been experienced with that physician back to headquarters, and that kind of completes it full circle. And that really can't happen well without a plan, because the worst thing that happens, and I've seen this and it's really not very thoughtful, is somebody says to me, oh, Dr. Jones is available at 2 o'clock. Who do you have at 2 o'clock? Oh, no. I'm not going to partner a physician up with an executive without both parties being very prepared with clear sets of objectives and strategies as to what's and goals to be accomplished during the meeting. So that thoughtful preparation will really drive towards better Congress engagement, as an example.
Excellent. Yeah, some great pieces of advice there. Mark, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, again, I'm going to take the micro perspective. The great thing about being a panelist with Randy is from her experience, she's got so much knowledge to kind of talk about. We'll never have compromising data points to talk about. So we're on not opposite ends of the spectrum, but different levels of perspective. So I see as potential outcomes of an integrated plan, I think holistically, and I think it mirrors what Randy's been talking about this entire period. When you have an effective KOL management team and plan in place, it requires a cross-functional team working in the same direction in a coordinated manner and with the help possibly of a shared information system. So the 3 bullets underneath that holistic and umbrella statement, I think potential outcomes would be the development of a KOL system and platform. And you use that platform to store information that's relative to KOL profiles, KOL engagement plans, and KOL interactions. And I know that as Randy just talked about, developing an impactful engagement for conversations, all those insights in all the places that she's probably worked at probably were stored in some type of system or platform. I think the second thing is a cross-functional strategic team, and that team is used to gather and analyze information across medical and commercial departments, maybe clinical departments, so that everyone's working from the same sheet of music, to use a pun, and to make sure that that integrated plan is effective between all of those different business units. And I think, to kind of put an end note on all of that, I think the global objectives that are set for KOL engagements, ultimately, they should contribute either directly or indirectly to meeting the brand strategic objectives. And that might be introspective of its life cycle position. I think there's certain ways to kind of make sure that it meets that brand strategy. And I'm curious, as we start to close out, what Randy kind of thinks about that last statement I made, and if that's in alignment with what she's seen and maybe the practices that she's tried to put in place as a leader for a team.
Yeah, it has to be. It really does. If we kind of just took this whole conversation full circle. You have to have that piece, or else it doesn't. The whole story and the whole process doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I agree with you guys, and whether we call it an integrated stakeholder plan, I mean, regardless of what all of you listening might call it at your company, I think we've touched on a lot of really important points here today. And you know, if MSLs are going out and engaging with KOLs, and you gather some sort of insight, and whether that you've determined it's just a piece of information or something that is truly actionable, an actionable insight, and we take that back internally to the company, and it doesn't align with our medical strategy for the product, what's the point? You've wasted
Right.
your time, the KOL's time, and everybody else's time. That's why all this is important at the most granular, basic level. That's why you got to know your medical strategy and all these things. This has been excellent. We are running out of time very quickly. I do want to end with, I'd like for both of you to quickly give us one practical piece of advice or tip you would recommend based on the topics we discussed today. I know we've already given a couple, but just to kind of close it out, especially for the MSLs and managers out there. Randy, I'm going to start with you. Just one practical piece of advice or tip related to anything we've talked about today.
Sure. Be bold. Don't be afraid. You're experts at what you do. You know your physicians better than anyone else. Be bold, represent them, and bring their diversity of thought back into the organization and or across the organization.
Excellent. Mark?
I would say find some way to use data. Use data to make your activities more efficient and strategic, and that benefits everyone.
Yep. And certainly mine is, you know, in general, have a plan, and certainly again have a plan for all your KOLs. And most importantly, like any plan, the plan is useless as a piece of paper sitting on a shelf unless you execute on it. And so that's what I would tell you is to have a practical plan and execute on it. Mark, Randy, thank you very much for this awesome discussion today. As we close out here, again, I would like to thank H1 for sponsoring this event and partnering with the MSL Society on this. We, of course, have next week's show. I'd encourage you to join us for the next show. We're actually going to be talking about novel approaches to engaging KOLs and gathering insights from virtual conferences. And so VP of Medical Affairs with Pfizer, Eddie's going to be joining us next week, along with Rob from H1. So with that, I'm going to wrap up today's show. I want to thank once again Randy and Mark for being with us. We really hope that everybody on the call found this valuable. And as I mentioned, MSL Insights will be ongoing. We have a very brief survey for everybody we'd like for everyone to participate in to help us develop future shows. But with that, I want to thank everyone and really appreciate it. And so Randy, Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Appreciate it, Sam.
Thank you.